Bring a Trailer podcast.
We're welcoming everyone back to the BAT podcast here with Alex Porter, a staffer at the site. And I'm joined again by Zach Beatty, also a staffer, downgraded from his impressive title to staffer. We are both staffers.
I love it. Podcast hot start. We're diving right into it.
We are.
Talking 10 questions.
Oh, Jim Rosenthal. Yeah.
God,
what an impressive background that guy has.
Oh, everyone that we've done on, they're like such good reads. But yeah, him in particular, it blew me away. Also, the list of cars that he owns.
Oh my God,
it's
dude.
Crazy.
I know. I was blown away by that too.
I'm so envious of his storage space because you can tell he clearly has a warehouse or like a super deep garage.
And he talked about what's up front, which I like. Like, what do you keep up front?
Laughing at the 3.5 and the 280 SEL both live up front,
which is smart. Those are the cars I would keep up front. Jim Rosenthal is such an amazing user, and his collection of cars is great.
It's the first just wall of text I've seen from someone answering the question, what cars do you currently own?
It's an amazing collection of cars that he owns, but also super cool that he was willing to list them all, which I don't know if everyone's always comfortable doing, but a lot of cool old Mercedes.
I love that he snuck in the low mileage 330,000 Tacoma.
Yeah, important. We all have one of those that we got to drive around.
But that storage space is what I aspire to, with him talking about the 3.5 coupe, the 280 SEL, and I think the Cobra up front.
Oh, that's right. A Kirkham Cobra, which is really cool. I think metal bodied, aluminum bodied. That's the picture in the lead.
Yeah, all the Kirkhams are alloy.
There's no fiberglass Kirkham?
I don't think so.
Oh, interesting. Today I learned. Really cool feature, really cool user. We kind of got onto this topic thinking about how we got into cars. BAT, for me at least, was a big part of my journey. I mean, one of the things I like about 10 Questions is, it's the kind of stuff that I like to read when I was just a fan of the website more than 10 years ago, right? Like just these posts that Randy would write and, talking about interesting people in the car world.
Yeah, I agree. I'm right there with you. Like reading, this is months ago, maybe even over a year ago now, but the 10 Questions with George Dyer, Sebring winner. It's incredible wealth of info. And for me, it's motivating.
Yeah, totally. I mean, all these guys are so impressive and have so much experience and knowledge under their belt. I want to drive all those cars. Every single one of Jim Rosenthal's cars, I was like, oh man, I would like to drive one of those. Have you driven a Pagoda? I know you like Pagodas.
No, I've only driven an R107. That's as old as
it's a slightly different driving experience. It's been a long time since I drove a Pagoda, but very different, as I recall.
I mean, I'm sure they feel solid and just Benzes of that era.
They're both definitely solid. As I recall, again, it's been a while, 15 or 20 years, but Pagoda is a much lighter car, feels lighter, it's an older era of car. Also, the one I drove was a 280 4-speed, which is a very different program than especially a 380 SL with a automatic.
How did you know it was a 380 that I drove?
That was a guess. That was famously not to denigrate anyone who loves the 380, but when I used to work on those cars, that was famously the motor you didn't want. Is that a motorcycle next door?
Must be shop.
Little fire up. Oh yeah. We've got a motorcycle shop right next door, so there it is, fired up.
I still got to take my Moto Compo over there to get a carb cleaning.
Is that where you're going to get it work done?
I think so. It's like attached to our building. Why wouldn't I?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Have you driven it? Have you ridden it yet?
Yeah, I went on one big Moto Compo journey around town, and I went to this nice beer and bottle shop and kind of loaded my backpack up with a few bottles, and then got on the Moto Compo, and it lost 3 miles an hour off the top speed.
You also have to go up your hill on the way back. That was a brave undertaking on your part.
Yeah, this was great. I was as leaned over as you can be on a Moto Compo in the corner, and I hit a patch of gravel on those little 10-inch wheels, and I got total speed wobbles, almost completely lost it, but managed to recover. And then it definitely struggles on hills.
Is this your first motorcycle experience in a while?
It is. Yeah. Definitely ignited something back inside me. And people don't know what to do with it. You're riding it around.
I was going to ask what reactions are like in
everyone
traffic.
Expects it to be electric.
Uh-huh.
But you just have this plume of 2-stroke smoke coming out the back and this hilarious little noise it's making while you're sitting on what looks like a briefcase.
2-strokes are so sick. I got passed in traffic the other day by an old Vespa, kind of a beat up, unrestored blue 2-stroke Vespa. And the guy's shifting it, right? It's a manual. I'm like, that's baller. I like the new Vespas too, but it's so cool to see an old 2-stroke one.
If inner city traffic wasn't quite as sketchy, getting around on a scooter is just such a pleasant way of life.
On the Moto Compo, are you in traffic or are you in the bike lane?
Well, maybe I shouldn't share this, but the thing about the Moto Compo is sidewalks become a lane.
Yeah, totally. No. For sure.
This one, because I think I need to have the carb cleaned. Like they're supposed to go 25 miles an hour. Mine on like the flattest of roads is going like 17 and a half miles an hour.
Oh, okay.
So those dumb little Lime scooters that are now just trash in every major city.
They're dusting you off.
Those are like kind of similar speeds. So I feel justified in some kind of random sidewalks.
Of course.
Like that.
Are these single speed?
Yeah. It's a one
okay.
speed.
Gotcha. Fun stuff. I'm glad you have that.
So hopefully I can bring that beast up to its full 25 mile an hour potential.
Got to get it up to max. What's max HP? What's the big HP number on that thing? Is it under 10?
Oh, I think it's 2.5 horsepower.
Oh, it's 2.5. It's way less than 10. Amazing.
And I think a horse technically makes 2 horsepower.
Oh, interesting.
So
horses are more powerful than they used to be.
Yeah, don't ask me to walk you through that. Math.
No, let's walk away from that topic as quickly as we can. If it's okay, I'd love to, not to shift gears too abruptly, but I'd love to talk to you a little bit about some of your recent track experiences. You've been, as we were talking about before we started recording here, you've been on quite a journey in the 8 years that I've known you in terms of perfecting your driving skills, getting better and better, faster and faster over the years that I've known you. And that included starting with open tracking. And now I think you've got a provisional racing license. Is that right?
I did, but I went through the easy way to get it.
Which is?
I recently did the Bondurant Racing School. They have a 3-day and a 4-day, both of which you get. I don't even think I have a provisional license. I think I just got referred for a full comp license.
Oh, wow.
So I can
skip right to the top.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. The school is wonderful. The instructors
you loved it. This is what I wanted to get you talking about.
Man, I can go deep on some of this. Actually,
And this was Bondurant has more than one location, or is this the only Bondurant that's left?
They have one location. They bounced around a bit. I think they were in Ontario, California, maybe in the late 70s, early 80s. And then they were at Sonoma Raceway.
Right, I remember that.
Up until the earthquake. And then right around there, they shifted. And I think that's when they moved to Phoenix and the whole facility there.
So you were down there, and you told me more than one track.
Sorry, I keep calling it Bondurant, but now it's Radford.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Most of the instructors are like old school guys and Bondurant loyalists, so it comes up back and forth. So yeah, the school is wonderful, but they really emphasize safety, learning the line, knowing the flags, awareness.
Side by side. Back when I was learning how to race with NASA many years ago, they did a lot of side by side exercises, like what's it like to go through a corner as fast as you can when a car is 6 inches from your door.
There was less of that, which is why I'm a little blown away with. There were some people in the class, I guess I was surprised were there at what you'd call graduation at the end. So imagining them just having their competition license and going out and wheeling, that's maybe a little terrifying.
Door to door is crazy. Like I have memories of having cars on both sides of me, like pitching a car into a corner and not being able to see the outside of the track on either side. It's pretty disconcerting to be in that position.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine and hope to experience soon. So, and that was when you were racing Pro 7? Or
Pro 7 Mazdas. Yeah, they were a little first generation. What is that? An FB RX-7s.
Nice.
That was a long time ago.
And those are live rear axle. Those are actually like kind of sketchy cars,
man, I think that's where I learned so much car. Yeah, live rear end. I didn't know. I was 20 years old, me and my partner that owned it. And we didn't know how to set up the car or anything. And it was, I mean, you could barely catch it in a spin. And it was probably because we didn't know how to set it up. And slick tires and tire technology's come a long way since then too. They were, they weren't a slick. I mean, they were comp tires. They had grooves on them. And as I recall, the fast guys would like shave them down, but we were so cheap. We wanted to make them last as long as we could because it was like $400 for a set of these tires for the 13-inch wheels. And so we didn't do that.
Well, it is funny because for me, I always look to like the experiences you learn the most out of are ones like you had where, you spin it or you're forced to adapt to what's like.
But easier to do that when you're young and dumb. I wouldn't want to do that now. I mean, like I stopped racing in my early 20s. So I started driving street cars, like open tracking street cars, which was kind of novel back then. And what I'm curious about is how much that's changed because you've done a lot of that. And
we'll get into that. I guess I was just think it's interesting because I've always thought of that. And I was constantly like asking the instructors, like, what's a good tool to learn on? And they're all just go buy a Cayman GT4.
Totally.
Like, just buy the easiest one, get out there, go drive it.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably smart. I mean, like seat time matters so much. But what I was going to say is by the time I was in my mid 20s and I had an S2000, which was like a stock street car and I had cheapo Kumo tires on it, I started to get scared of spinning. Like I used to spin all the time in that RX-7. And I've gotten more and more hesitant to do, like, I don't know, the older I get. So being young and being stupid is helpful. But
you still have a full cage in the RX-7 and an S2000 open top.
I don't know if
Doesn't
I
feel
ever
like you
told
wanna
you
roll
this
in.
anecdote. The reason we got, because you didn't even have to have door bars back then, as I recall. This is my high school buddy and I. We were in an auto shop together. We really wanted to buy a Star Mazda, like the open wheel.
Is that what became Formula Mazda?
See, you know this stuff better than I do now. It was a fully winged car, and I think it had a 13A in it. Like they later got put Renesas motors in these, the RX-8 engines, I think. But it was a pretty serious car. But you could buy them for like 7-8 grand in the, we're talking like very early 2000s, around the year 2000, 2001.
Yeah, Star Mazda and Formula Mazda, they're synonymous.
And then we went to an SCCA race, and this French guy, I wish I remember his name. He's like, you do not want to, you don't want to race that car. He's like, you want the car for people with the balls. And it was the Pro 7. And we bought ours for $3,000 from a Yahoo executive here in San Jose. And it was, I think it's fair to equate it to what Spec Miata is now. It was like cheap. You could go to any junkyard, buy a motor for $50. Like we bought 2 transmissions. Cars were super beat up. I mean, we just hauled it on an open trailer and slept in the bed of a pickup truck. It was really grassroots racing. But it was, I think a slow car that didn't handle very well, whether that was our fault or not, unclear, was really helpful for developing those skills. And also not knowing that we were ignorant, that we were just doing our best. But man, I spun all the time. I had some really scary moments in that car.
On which tracks?
The scariest one, I've never been back, was Big Willow. For people familiar with that track, it's in the Ford versus Ferrari movie. It's a famous old track, fastest track in the West, they call it. And turn 8 and 9, if I'm recalling correctly, are two, like turn 8 kind of blends into turn 9. Turn 9's a right-hander back onto this front straight. And 8 is this big high-speed sweeper with its decreasing radius. And I spun backwards off the back of the track at, I don't know, over 100 miles an hour probably, and the glass hatch popped off, like wind got onto the back, and it flipped up in the air and smashed on the track, and we ruined everyone's day. It was, anyway, those are the kind of things that I would be terrified to do now as a 40-year-old. Like, right? Like I wouldn't want to inconvenience people. I don't want to spin.
That's what's most traumatic to me, like ruining other people's experience.
We also had we patched our coolant system up one time with like insufficient like radiator hose, and it melted in the grid, and all the coolant puked out and got on everyone's like brand new slicks. No. And like, in hindsight, I remember being so embarrassed and thinking all the older, more mature people were mad at us, but everyone was pretty cool. Like we finished that weekend when the hatch popped off with no back hatch. Like Tech let us back out on the track. We just ran with no rear hatch on the car. I don't see, that's different. I don't know if people would do that anymore. I don't know if that would even be permitted anymore. I'm not talking trash about NASA. They were a pretty safety serious organization.
No, NASA is still a very, very tight operation when I run with them.
I mean, so the whole thing back then was when you do HPDE, it was to get a race. Like people were doing it not to open track, but to get a racing license. Like that's everyone was like working their way up. And like by the time you got to whatever the fastest group was, Blue or whatever it was like the 4th group. That was a time trial. I think I'm remembering this correctly. That was
Group 4 still.
Oh, they still do that. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it was like full wheel to wheel, just not competition, but they were competing with each other, just or competing against themselves, right? Like for fastest lap. And basically, once you got to that level, they would give you a racing license. But it was very observational. Like the instructors see you, they think you're safe. Great, you can go race.
Well, in my experience, NASA still pretty much operates the same way.
Interesting.
Group 1 through 4, you need instructor sign off to graduate to each next one, and then. Yeah, if you get all the way to Group 4, I think you can just get a NASA competition license, which is different than the SCCA license. But I think some organizations are accepting of
either.
Other licenses.
I think that's true. So what's the next step? What are you going to do with it?
So I don't know. Yeah, I've been doing all these open track days, kind of like.
You've done a lot of them. Do you know roughly how many you've done?
Probably done like
50. Have you done that many?
I haven't done quite 50. I'm somewhere in the 40s.
That's amazing.
Probably. It's sort of amazing, but then you're like, man, 40, I'm still not that fast,
I could do a 500 events and I'm not going to be that fast. I'm limited by talent. So you have to make peace with that at some point.
I get frustrated about like hitting a wall and how can I improve? And then like, or maybe I just don't have it in me. So yeah, I've been going with a coach a lot. And yeah, it's been a humbling but enjoyable for the most part experience.
I bet you are fast, by the way.
I don't know. So many people are so fast out there now, and that would be really interesting for you to see what it's like in 2024.
But to me, that's intimidating. Also, the car, like just cars are so much faster. Like my little Civic Si daily driver it's so fast. It's probably the fastest car I've ever owned. Like not necessarily in a straight line, but on a back road, like my NSX couldn't keep up with that car.
Well, that is another really interesting dynamic about open tracking now compared to 20 years ago, because guys were, if you had an E46 M3 in 2004. That's a fast car.
Yes.
And now guys still set up E46 M3s with a ton of tire and they're still pretty fast, but just raw horsepower.
But I bet they're considered a momentum car, whereas like a 330 horsepower car to me is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, most of what I was doing my open tracking in was a Cayman R, which is the perfect tool for the job. And
right.
330 horsepower, a little under 3,000 pounds, just like great car. And on the grid, it was kind of underpowered. I almost felt like I was in a scrappy car compared to.
And that's tough if the rich doctor and his Viper doesn't want to pull over on the straight if you don't have an open passing.
There's some of that, but after you've gone enough and you're in, every organization has multiple run groups. And an interesting thing, I don't know if this is what it was like for you or not, but in the top run groups, the top two, they specify a lap time you need to maintain.
Oh.
If you want to run top group and you're not running...
It was definitely more gut feel back in the day.
I think it's sub 140 at Laguna for the top group, and it might even be a little faster than that, that's like a cracking lap, especially if you don't have a 500 plus car. Yeah, they bump you down.
Very few people were even timing their laps back in my day, right? Like, I mean, at one point, my buddy and I had a stopwatch for ourselves, but you could rent the transponders, and some people had them, and they'd zip time to the front of their car. I don't know if people still do that, but most people did not do that unless they were like, at the point where they're like, okay, I'm about to start racing and I really want consistency. I was just trying to survive and keep the car on the track, really. So I was slow, basically, is what I'm saying.
Makes sense. I mean, and everyone's out there for like a different experience.
Totally.
I always just use the like 18 holes of golf analogy where like, yes, some people are out there and think they should be on the PGA Tour and are doing so great. And some people are just having some fun with their buddies.
Everybody's having their own experience, that's for sure.
Yeah, and all of us compared to Randy Popst around Laguna are slow for the most part.
That's the thing, right? Like, unless you're Michael Jordan, nobody is the best, right? There's always somebody faster.
Yeah. So that's been an interesting journey for sure, and a little aimless. And then I was like, well, I guess I kind of want to there's something like validating in the car world about all these cars are just so fast and feeling like you can more confidently exploit them and use them to their limits. And also through that experience, you're able to just like talk about them more intelligently.
Totally.
And not fall into this like stereotypical, it understeers at the limit kind of language. Yeah, which is pretty painful. So yeah, learning more about how cars behave in different situations, what changes due to them, and being able to like articulate and talk through that. It's like, and now we've lost 100% of our listener base. But that's been like part of the fun for me also.
Yeah. When you think back on, your teenage self, your 16-year-old self, or even your 12-year-old self, I don't even know when you got interested in cars. Do you think that person, or when, at the age you did get interested in cars, did you think, I want to be on track? I want to be, or would that kid be surprised by what you're doing now?
I think so. Like growing up, all that stuff. I remember seeing like photos of guys I went to high school, like on a racetrack in their high school car or whatever, and just being like, how did you do that? It was just so.
Guys in your high school took their cars on track, like drag strips, or they were like on.
No, like going to Thunder Hill or even like autocross. I'm kind of like right of the internet generation, but it still seemed like hard to search around and find like where I could go do this in the early 2000s.
Seems like magic a little bit. Like, how did you even get there? Like,
yeah, exactly. So I was always like, that seems like something I would like to do.
Okay.
I just literally don't know how to even start doing that.
What kind of cars were high school kids taking to the track?
My neighbor, which is still like a formative memory for me, he had a red E30 M3 and it was on BBS wheels and he had some upgrades on it, had a little Evo spoiler. And that was just his car for high school. And I know. I was so envious.
This is mid-aughts, something like that, or late aughts, right?
This would have been in 2004 or so.
Okay.
I absolutely love that car. And then I'll never forget, I was chatting with him after he'd had it for a little while, and his dad had a black E46 M3 with a bunch of AC Snitzer mods,
which was new at the time, right? This was like a hot car, yeah. Okay.
And they had their pair of BMWs, and they're like, "Yeah, we're going to take the E30. We're taking it to Barrett Jackson to sell."
Ooh,
I know.
Okay.
It just cracks me up to think of them selling it. And they're like, "Yeah, I think we might get 15 grand."
Yeah.
And I had like tears forming my eyes, just trying to wonder how I could scrounge up the cash to buy it. So they sold that, and he got a blue E36 M3 to replace it with, and obviously put underglow on it. Yeah, it was very of the period.
That was not a track car, I'm assuming?
I think he did. He had some
underglow at the track.
His dad was actually an instructor, I think, and then they got like a 993 race car.
Okay.
So
these are pretty serious people then.
So yeah, like guys like that. There are some people. There's some people I knew that had the Mini Cooper S at the time was coming out.
Sure. That's interesting. That's around the time I was open tracking, kind of racing sometimes, but mainly just going. I still was going to the track a lot. And I remember that was when STI Subarus came out and Evos. So you'd see a lot of those at the track. S2000s for sure. A lot of the instructors had kind of raced out E36 M3s because they were already getting cheap at that point in time, right? So kind of track rat E36 M3s with big wings. Everyone ran big wings back then. I don't like functional, but like really tall, like taller than the roof line.
That hasn't changed much.
Okay,
both
interesting.
In cars and wings.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
interesting. I mean, those are the main cars I remember. Like people had older cars too, right? There were Mustangs and Camaros, like 3rd and 4th gen. Trying to think of what else was there. There wasn't a lot. I mean, there certainly wasn't things like I remember one time a guy showed up in a Challenge 360 Ferrari, and it was like people were like open mouth. And like I think now that like they were agape. He had like a big transporter. I think he had 2, as I recall. It was like a rich guy. And now that would be like there's lots of supercars out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, especially like all this localized to the Bay Area. So
sure.
Your track attendance may vary depending on where you go. But yeah, a lot of McLarens. The new Supra is super big out there.
Oh, that's
Guys
interesting.
Are
they fast in those?
Yes.
Oh, that reminds me. Yeah, 370Zs or 350. It was 350Zs where there were a lot of those. I saw a guy, not a dig on Nissan. I saw a factory wheel spoke break at Button Willow one time. And that guy, the car went end over end. Anyway, sorry. I'm sure they're fine.
Well, some of those are still out there because a lot of those cars have gotten pretty affordable to go rip around. And E36 M3s are still big. E46 M3s, a lot of those. But yeah, new Supras.
Modified on the E36, right? Like, I don't think those cars they'd be almost a moving roadblock unless you had modifications on them.
Some guys are, you can get a lot of tire on there.
Yeah,
and, that's another thing that like...
Oh, tires are very different than they used to be, I bet, too.
That's a thing that's, I think, changed a lot, where not only are guys bringing multiple sets of tires and wheels, but yeah, you can run 200 treadwear tires driving to and from the track, and the amount of grip you have over what is already like an objectively great tire, like a PS4S.
Our RX-7. So there were 99s, like stock non-turbo 996s out there, and there the other car I forgot is the C5 Z06 was a big track car, and our RX-7 with 125 horsepower was about the same lap time as a Z06 or a 996. And that's was all in tire. And now I assume that would be very different because a street tire would provide some. Remember how big of a deal it was that the C5 Z06 had 1G in lateral grip? That was like such a big deal. It was the first street car for that. You're probably too young to remember that. That was a huge deal in like 03 or whatever.
We were an automobile mag family. I remember getting the
RIP.
I think they had a yellow long-term car.
Awesome cars.
Yeah. So yeah, still a lot of Corvettes.
Yeah.
Still every Porsche you can imagine. There's a couple guys locally that have F430s, which is pretty cool.
You told me there's a guy who's out there real fast in an F430.
Oh yeah, they both of them run Top Run Group. Part of the appeal to me too is just like getting out and using a lot of cars kind of like they're intended. Like those F430s, they're pretty robust on track. And as long as you're not running carbon ceramics, the consumables aren't too bad. I think both the guys do the maintenance themselves. And
no kidding. Wow.
Yeah, it's just like a little more exciting, unique option than like the sea of GT3s you see out there.
Can I do a quick sidebar?
Oh, please.
What is a supercar? What is a supercar? I don't know if there's a firm definition or not, but I hear the term used extremely loosely and I'm confused.
I don't know. I think I use it loosely also. I mean, it used to mean something like,
right. It feels like it means less now, especially because is a Civic Type R as fast as like a 288 GTO? I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, I think F40 959, like that's even a Mira. Like all of those are clearly like a supercar.
I was going to ask what the first one is, and I was going to posit the Mira. What is the first thing that could really be called a supercar?
That's, I guess, where. But man,
is the Gullwing a supercar?
I was just going to say maybe the Gullwing. Yeah, in the mid 50s, I would say so. I mean, sure, the performance changed a lot when American cars.
I had a buddy tell me his dad was out driving like drag racing at Famoso in Bakersfield. Shout out Famoso, like Tri-5 Chevys in the late 50s. And this guy came out in a Gullwing, and all the like Bakersfield racers. This is like in the late 50s, in period when a Gullwing was new. They're like, this is stupid. And he's like, and that guy came out and dusted people off with
amazing. What What's the top speed of the Gullwing? Do you know?
They have different gear ratios, but I think the one that's geared for the fastest speed is over 150, maybe even 160.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of the 1950s, I mean, that just is a race car.
Correct.
For the road.
I read this in a magazine years ago about the president of Mercedes North America in the 60s going back to Germany for like a month to do something at the mothership and getting a Gullwing as a loaner. They weren't new anymore, but it was, I don't think they could sell all of them, right? And so he got one as a loaner, and he said being on the Autobahn in the 60s when Germany was still recovering from World War II, so there weren't many cars out there. And most of the cars that were out there are Volkswagens and, Mercedes with little tiny engines, can only go 60 or 70 miles an hour. So Autobahn's not crowded. And he's in a car that can legitimately cruise at 130 plus all day long. He's like, it's the best driving feeling I've ever had. You're just going 130 everywhere with no traffic.
It's one of those beautiful moments too that like you'll just never see again in history.
Nope, it's gone.
Now every car can go over.
Also, the Autobahns are crowded, I think, too.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's it. Yeah,
amazing.
Isn't that amazing? I think about that all the time.
So I don't know. Yeah, supercar. It's a term born out of a way to signify that one car's performance is greater or more unique than like more common cars. But now that performance is so democratized, it's kind of meaningless. And then you get guys to talk about hypercars.
Right. Which is like, I didn't even want to bring it up because that's even maybe more meaningless. What is a hypercar? I don't know, a Pagani or something?
People, use it to define cars. Like the Veyron is maybe the first, what you'd call hypercar. Koenigsegg's, Paganis, all these cars that have performance that's just so well and above any car that you can obtain.
But how much faster is that than whatever the hottest McLaren you can buy for 300 grand is? Like that's also extremely fast, isn't it? And like a Porsche Turbo S, isn't a 992 Turbo S like 2 seconds to 60 or something?
Well, it gets even weirder when you talk about like the second hottest McLaren, because that's like only a few tenths off of the hottest McLaren. So you wouldn't actually say it's that much worse. So I don't know. It becomes kind of meaningless. But I think also there's some part of like now the performance has been more removed from it. And there's a like scarcity or production aspect where, the current Tesla Model S with the highest performance spec will dust them all to probably 100 miles an hour.
Totally.
I
sound like such an old man. I'm like, my Civic Si is fast.
Civic Si is fast. Though it is funny, the horsepower on that car has been the same for 25 years.
I mean, it's all relative to me, right? Because I only have, I guess this is true for anyone. I only have the experience of the cars I've driven.
But the SI you drove in high school was 200 horsepower, and your current SI is 200.
The one,
or were they 180?
It was 170, I think. But so different and no torque. But also that car, actually, it wasn't even that much. That car was like 2,600 pounds, and my new one's only like 2,900 pounds. They're still really light. I love Hondas.
Oh, for sure.
Sorry, I'm such a
Hondas and Porsches.
I know. I subscribe to the same philosophy thanks to you. I'm such a partisan.
Sorry, did we settle what a supercar is?
No, I don't think there's an answer. Is there an answer? Good. What is it?
If there's an answer, please email us at podcast@bringatrailer.com.
Yeah. I would actually love to see it. I actually think you got pretty close with it being a car that's performance envelope is so far, that's considerably outside of what the performance envelope is of even other performance cars, but that means a lot less in the modern era of democratized performance, which I love that term, by the way.
Other philosophical question on that, like, can a sedan be a supercar?
I mean, totally. I'm thinking about all these things. Like, I mean, aren't M3s like 600 horsepower now?
I don't think they're quite that much.
But fast, and I bet with a dual clutch or even if they have an 8-speed automatic.
And by M3, you mean M4, Alex?
Oh, God. Is it an M4 Grand Coupe? Is it an M4 that's a coupe, but it actually has 4 doors? So why is it not an M3? Anyway, I have
M4 comp is 503 horsepower.
Okay.
But now you get into this thing where cars that have horsepower rated like what would be crank horsepower are actually putting out like wheel horsepower about that. I mean, everything's just so fast now.
Right. And a lot of stuff is, and this is different when, I come from the era when things were overrated, but I hear that cars are underrated quite a bit. They're actually quite a bit more powerful than you would think they are.
It's crazy.
Totally crazy. Turbos, man. Everything's got turbos. I still like high rev and NA cars like you.
Yeah.
One thing I thought we could do here at the end, and it's actually apropos, and I was biting my tongue when you brought up E30 M3s, is it was a question of the week. What are your favorite engine swap cars that were on BAT? And it got me thinking about a bunch of cars that I've really enjoyed on site. And then also you were talking about that 93 Accord that had a H22 in it. And I know this is near and dear to your heart too. And I also thought I might prompt you by mentioning one of the first engine swap cars I worked on here at BAT when I first got hired to be an editor from June or July of 2016. So just a couple months after I got hired. And it was that, do you remember? I bet you'll remember this car. It was an E30 M3 with an S52 swap. And it was claimed by the seller to be the first S52 swapped E30 M3.
Was it the kind of like wine?
Yes, correct. One? And it had like a cool looking aftermarket 6-spoke wheel.
I think about that car maybe on like a monthly basis. And it actually popped up for sale in Washington a few months ago. Same car. The other awesome thing about that was it had a bar sticker.
That's right.
Part of why I still think about it. And
I think it was built in 99, like 1 year after, or like the year the S52 debuted here. So somebody must have smashed up their brand new E36 and they popped that motor in there.
Yeah, somewhere between when we sold it and the current or new owner and owner in between, they kind of like gutted the interior.
Oh.
I know. And I think they put
it had a nice stock looking tan interior.
It was perfect. That was one of the cars I still fantasize about, like tracking down and seeing what it looked like after. I was like, too bad. Not for me.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I think about that one all the time.
Yeah. Here, I have it up if you want to look at it. Look at how good it looks. I was like, does it look as good as I remember? It does.
Yeah, 1783 if anyone wants to
lot 1783.
But S54 swap E30 M3s, that's always been something I would love to do. I think S54 is just one of the great engines of our lifetime, in my opinion. Revs to 8 grand, sounds sweet.
Oh my God, it's kind of savage. I'd forgotten how savage it is.
Just super charismatic.
Yep.
And at least their faults are known and there's fixes for them. And E30 M3s are relative to new cars there, but they're not that light. They're around 3,000 pounds, and the S54 adds maybe 100. So I don't know if you do the comp airbox, call it 350 horsepower in a 3,100 pound car. That's great, but it's not like scary power in my opinion.
And it's revy power. You got to rev those cars up. I just bought my 996 before that, and the S54, even though it's down on power a little bit compared to that 996 GT3 engine, it felt a lot more rowdy.
Yes, that's why I like them. That another interesting power plant we had, which was your motor. We had, I think it was a Superlight, one of those track focused cars that you can buy off the shelf.
Is that a supercar?
Oof.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, some guy out there that's owning a 90s Mosler is advocating.
Oh my God, the one with the turbo 4-cylinder?
Yeah.
Is that a supercar? I mean, they had supercar performance, right? They were on par with
we had a green one on offer from the original owner a few months ago, and I was like, how strong would that be if
the Mosler?
Yes. It was I think 92 or 94.
It doesn't want to, maybe it's not Mr. Mosler. Doesn't somebody from that company comment on the site?
There's definitely the guy that maintains the
trademark
database.
or the database. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Okay.
But I thought, could you imagine showing up to the modern track events around here in that car and then actually turning pretty fast laps?
Yeah, totally.
People would be losing their minds.
They totally would be. You'd only have to go out for 2 or 3 laps to be the winner of the track day.
But anyway, we had this, I think it was an ultralight or a superlight, one of those, and it had a 996 GT3 engine in it.
Which no kidding.
It's a pretty cool power plant.
Is a C4 ZR1 Corvette a supercar?
Oof. I don't know. It's weird to say that about like C2 Corvettes, I would say are supercars for the time.
Yeah. I mean, like a Fuelie or the, 6-pack, 3 2-barrels on a 427, the 435 horse on a 427.
The Corvette is always like democratized supercar performance.
I presume you're out there with C8s occasionally, or I'm assuming they're very fast.
I haven't been, after my track car got crushed by a tree at the top of my street, I haven't been in a few months, and there weren't a lot of C8s running this summer. But I bet this year we'll start to see more, especially the Z06s. I mean, just such crazy performance, even selling over MSRP.
Even a C7, I'm sure, especially they made there's some with the big 7-liter NA engine, and there's also supercharged C7s. There's a lot of track focused C7 models.
There's fewer. Yeah. There's more of a European and Japanese car base here in Northern California than I think maybe middle of the country or East Coast. Sure. You might see more Corvettes. There's not a ton of them. One of my instructors that I'd go with, he has a C7 Z06. So yeah, there's a few.
And those are supercharged, correct?
They are.
Yeah. Okay.
Some people complain of heat soak with the supercharged ones. I'm sure there's a fix.
Oh,
but
gosh, I know. You've already lost me. I don't know anymore. I do worry about that though. Do you see? So there were a lot of mechanical breakdowns. Sorry, we can still talk engine swaps if you want, but now I'm curious to grill you about track days again. I'll be very fast on this one. There used to be a lot of mechanical issues back in the day. Are street cars better suited for track work these days? My guess is that they are, right? Manufacturers now know that people want to do this with their high performance street cars.
Yeah. And also just with the evolution of internet forums, it's like we're just talking about the S54. Like multiple people are having the same problems and they're able to discuss them. And right now with the new BRZ Toyota 86 is like the perfect example. They came out with the new one. Performance is great, looks great, seems like the perfect off the shelf, brand new 30 grand car you can take to the track. And a bunch of guys are having oiling issues in high speed corners.
Interesting.
And they're solving it in real time. I'm actually kind of enjoying geeking out on the forums and watching it because guys are literally manufacturing new oil pans and going them and running them over
Like
a
testing
weekend.
them.
And yeah, reporting back on the forum and saying, hey, I'm running a quart high with this pan and no issues.
Wow,
So
that's kind of cool.
I think that's changed a lot rather than just kind of word of mouth around the paddock.
Yeah, I'm sure. Porsche's dry sump. It's helpful to have that. Sorry, I cut you off earlier. I wanted to hear more motor swap cars that you had liked that had been on BAT. One that I always think about, and I'm sure you will remember, is the mid-engine Accord. Do you remember that car? So they put a V6 in the middle of a 90s Accord.
I remember the mid-engine Camaro.
That's a cool one too. I'd forgotten about that
but
one.
I don't remember a mid-engine.
It was almost like an R5 or like a Clio V6, but done Honda style. It was awesome. But talk about that Camaro, because that was really cool. It was like I don't even know what to say. It's not a Pantera because that's a Ford, but it was like kind of had that look. It was like a squared off 70s looking deal. Yeah. Or it was a first gen Camaro, wasn't it?
No, it was it was 67 or 68.
Yeah, okay.
Early car, had a little Mangusta look to it. You could say definitely unique. I mean, a lot of custom fabrication for sure.
For sure. There's a Mangusta live right now. I love Mangustas. They're supposed to be terrible cars, but they are so cool looking.
One that sticks out and was on my watch list was I think the Hoonigan guys did this, but it was a F-150 Lightning, Paul Walker, red, from
the original Fast and Furious. It's the shop truck. Vehicle. Yeah, of course.
They put a 2J in it and a 6-speed.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
1,000 horsepower, crazy build.
Man, that's kind of a cool idea. Although the motor in that truck is cool too, the supercharged V8.
For sure. I always just appreciate when people put engines kind of like where they don't belong or where it's a surprise swap like that.
Did you see the C110 Skyline GTR that's on the site right now? And it has a L28, which is an interesting motor in there. I think those cars look great with twin cam engines in them, right? Because that's what they're supposed to have with a big wide head. Robbie Pyle and I were going deep, shout out Robbie, on what motors would be cool in C110 Skylines.
What would you put?
I don't know. We were talking about...
Don't say VQ.
No. It's got to be straight six. It's got to be an inline, and it's, in my opinion, got to be twin cam to look right with the big, and ideally with a crackle finish on the valve cover, right? I don't know. We were thinking up a bunch of different stuff.
There's RB is
that's what he suggested. Obvious. The Skyline motor, right?
I think they're really tall. I don't know.
I mean, those cars are built for having an overhead cam engine in them, right? So there should be room, I would think. I thought I like sacrilegious swaps, so a BMW engine of some kind. I mean, how about an S54 in one of those, right? That'd be interesting. Just any kind of a straight six, I think, is the key, and ideally twin cam. Anyway, it's a really cool looking
Not
car.
An engine swap, but I'm loving all these late model Ferraris we're seeing with converted transmissions.
I know I saw 575.
Yeah, because 575s are sort of a bargain for where they sell relative to 550s.
They're so sick. They're such sick cars.
I know.
They're just like, it's one of those cars that I know people have been saying for a while. They're aging well, but every time I look at one, I'm like, man, it's just getting better and better, like a fine wine.
And all of a sudden, like 599s, which don't really do a lot for me, honestly, seeing that with a manual in it makes me pretty excited.
Yeah, I agreed. Everything is more exciting with a manual. Why don't you like 308, Zach? Why don't you like 308 GTBs? That crushed me the other day when you said you don't like them.
It's funny as I'm staring at a 208 GTB.
Oh, God, I like those too.
Which is actually sweet.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think 308s come from, to be diplomatic, an era that was maybe not Ferrari's best design language.
Yeah,
I mean, the cars that come before them are way prettier, I like the cars that come after them better as well. So...
I don't know why I'm exposing myself to this publicly, but I love those cars, as you know.
There's other cars from the 80s I'd rather have, I guess.
Yeah, it's an acceptable answer. It's more 308 GTBs for me. I'm sure there's plenty of people who I'll have to compete with for those. Speaking of weird engine swaps, the Stansworks guy put a K24 in one of those, which is a very interesting idea. And something that I think you and I both agree is interesting.
That's a good way to get to my actual fantasy swap, is to buy an early Turbo Carrera project
and
put a K24 in it.
What?
I think that would be...
Has anybody ever done that in a Porsche?
People have put K24s. There's one guy that I found online that put a K24 in like an '08 GT3, which is pretty hilarious.
Does it go north-south or does it sit sideways? Is it mid-engine? Okay, yeah. So it's still rear engine.
Mm-hmm.
And they hook it up to the Porsche transaxle? What do they do?
I don't know what transmission they used for that. I mean, they've got to use the Honda gearbox somehow, right?
So K-Series were never, sorry for exposing my ignorance here, they were never in a rear-wheel drive car, right? So you have to convert them no matter what if you want to put them in a north-south layout.
But I think it may work better in a rear engine car.
Well, the 308 makes sense because it's a sideways motor, so you can put a front-wheel drive powertrain in there. But the making it north-south is weird. But if you're going to do it in the front of a car, which I know people have done to power the rear wheels, I guess you could flip that around and do it in a Porsche. That's really interesting.
Anyway, an early Turbo Carrera project, engine long gone, shoving a K24 in there that's kind of built and revs to almost $9,000 would be pretty sweet.
I love Turbo Carreras.
Same.
I just think they're
also
so
just
sick.
a normal Turbo Carrera with the
totally
engine,
would be just fine. Would be just fine. There's like a million interesting things I'd like to do. I mean, you know me, I like hot rods, so I've always wanted to build a 32 3-window coupe hot rod, and I love a flathead. There's all kinds of interesting things you can do with a flathead motor. I've also fantasized about nailhead Buick motors in those. Also the little.
I talked about putting a Hemi in it.
Yeah, the Red Ram Dodge Hemi, which is little. It's quite a bit smaller than the famous Chrysler Hemi. I believe the DeSoto Hemi is 2 inches narrower, and then the Dodge is 2 inches narrower than that, so 4 inches narrower. So they're pretty little, and they came as small as 240 cubic inch, the Red Ram Hemi. But they also came in a 270, which I think is what I would like to go for. But you can get speed parts for them. You can put Hillborn injection on them. So I thought that would be cool, because one of the problems with a Hemi, the heads are so big, they stick out of the side of a hot rod. You can't have side covers on the motor, but with a Red Ram, you might be able to fit it in there with just little bumps on the side covers, because I like having the engine covered on a hot rod. But I also love the idea of unconventional motors in a hot rod, you know, turbo 4 cylinders, straight 6s, almost anything interesting. I saw one time a guy put this is back to V8s, but a little baby one. He put what's the Alpha with the little 2.5 liter injected V8 in it? Montreal. Put a Montreal engine, which is tiny, and it sat way far back up against the thing.
Sweet.
And it still had, I believe it still had Spica injection on it. I know, little 2.5 liter. It sounded crazy. So anything interesting in a hot rod, we've had lots of that. We've had every single one of those combinations that not the 4 cylinders, but we've had hot rods with Hemis in them. We've had big and little, including Red Ram Hemis. We've had hot rods with nail heads in them. That's kind of a classic. Tommy Ivo had a T-bucket with a nail head in it. So anything like that is exciting. And also, of course, when they're more affordable, people put Offenhauser 4 cylinders in hot rods back in the day, right? So
any car with a motorcycle swap.
Oh, that's interesting. Speaking of weird open track cars, there was a guy, I think it was a Geo Metro. There's a guy who used to bring out a car to open track days 20 years ago in Central California, Southern California. I think it was a Geo Metro. It was some kind of little economy car, and it had a 600cc motorcycle engine in the passengers, like next to him. So it sat next to the driver, and I think it had a paddle sequential. I think you had to shift it sequentially. It had a motorcycle gearbox in it, but it screamed, and it was completely stripped out. So it probably weighed, 1,400 pounds.
It's crazy. All the leader bikes now make 200 horsepower, and the engine itself doesn't weigh a whole lot.
Totally. So I think about anytime a motor is like the BMW motorcycles have that 1.5 liter straight 6 double red cam. I mean, I think all the time about what you could do with that. I mean, it's not set up for putting in a car, but would be interesting.
I know there's this whole interesting world of just motorcycle engines.
What's the big Goldwing engine? It's almost 2 liter
flat 6-cylinder.
It's a flat 6, right?
That I don't know.
Put that in a 911. a Subaru SVX engine in a 911. How about that?
Well, yeah, one of these days, maybe if and when I'm actually fast, we can revisit, talk about more of what I've done and go deep on the open wheel experience, which was the last day of the Radford School.
Oh man,
driving
great.
Open wheel is it's so
we can save that one for another day. Well, thanks, Zach. This was awesome. Any parting shots?
No. Browse the site. Tell us what's on your watch list. Reach out to us at podcast@.
Tell us what you want us to talk about.
Yeah.
Supercars? They want the supercar discussion again?
Yeah. Probably the two of us to talk less and hear other people talk more.
Yeah. Well, everyone is in luck because Randy and Howard will be back soon with more interviews. But anyway, awesome. Zach, this was a pleasure for me, if not for our listening audience. So thank you so much.
Likewise. All right. Catch you later.
All right.